Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. What I'm going to talk about today is imposter syndrome and something that often comes up in the context of work, of course. And what I'm going to talk about is say what it is, what I think it is, and then talk about why human beings experience it, and then go on to, of course, the bit that's of probably most significance for people, how to overcome imposter syndrome, and give some tips as to what to do if that is something that's around a lot in your life. So just beginning with what imposter syndrome is, I usually quite like quite a neat definition. A lot of the time when people are talking about imposter syndrome, they talk in terms of the symptoms that people might be experiencing. But the definition I like and will use for the purposes of this video is people who struggle to internalize their success. So if you're looking at internalizing there, what does that mean? That means there are lots of people who struggle to keep an ongoing sense of how good they are at what they do, particularly in the case of imposter syndrome at work. They struggle to keep a sense of that internally. So it's very fluid, depending on what's happening in the day or the feedback that they've got from somebody. That can really disappear even, and they can believe that they're not good at their job at all and they're going to get found out. If you're looking at the success part of it, people that experience imposter syndrome often are very successful externally. If you're looking at the objective data and from people looking in, get good appraisals, do well at work, have had long careers in often quite complicated jobs, but they just don't have that internal belief. They can't hold on to that belief internally of their worth and value generally. So what would that be made up of? All the skills, qualities, competencies that mean that they're very good at their job. And what that means for people on a day-to-day basis, it's a very distressing and difficult place to be, because it means they're always believing that they're not good enough, that they're going to get found out, so something goes wrong, that they're going to get fired. They don't believe they're as good as other people. They sort of can believe that they're outside of things at work or feel slightly separate to things at work. Those things, of course, mean that if they get some form of criticism from somebody, that has a huge adverse impact on them. They may even often imagine criticism. A lot of this in terms of imposter syndrome is that they're underestimating themselves in their imagination. Actually, the reality, as I say, based on objective data, is that they're really very good at what they do. And it will also mean that other people's opinions, when they get validated as well, they get a real contact high from that. So if somebody does compliment them or say they're doing a good job, that can really make their day. It's always going to feel good if somebody else says that we're doing a good job. We're programmed to need and want that sort of attention and care and validation from other people. But for somebody who experiences imposter syndrome, almost entirely their sense of self and validation is coming from other people, the external, and kind of achievement based as well. So real perfectionists struggle to get anything wrong, so to speak. That can be devastating for them and can therefore have a tendency to experience burnout as well, and you can really understand why. And it's not just within the confines of work. If you have imposter syndrome at work, then of course naturally the stress, the anxiety that can all cause is going to spill out over into your relationships outside as well. So it can have an adverse impact on somebody's physical well-being, as I say, their relationships outside, friendships, all that kind of thing. So it's really worth it if it's something that you do experience on an ongoing basis. Really worth looking at how you can manage that part and make some changes there. And that's of course what this video is about. Why is it so common? Around 75% of people say that they've had thoughts of the nature of imposter syndrome. And as I say, why is it so common? Well, I think that's for a number of reasons. Very naturally, human beings are problem focused, which means, it's our survival part that steps forward a lot. We're programmed to survive rather than to be happy. And that means that for survival, we need to spot problems and identify problems. And if you combine that with our imaginations now, then we can have the capacity to imagine problems, of course, and pull things from memory into the present day. So there's this real combination of the survival drive, the problem identifying, flaw finding, deficit finding part of us that, combined with our imagination in the context of work, means that we're constantly reminded by that, sort of to forget how good and how great we are at the things that we do. Now, we need a part of us that's going to the health and safety part and say, well, perhaps you're doing this wrong, or does that person like you? You know, we do need a health and safety part to check that we are doing things in the way that we might in order to do well at our job. The trouble is, when this part dominates, all it does is see negatives, all it does is see deficits and problems. And as I say, you combine that with an imagination and it can be all of somebody's experience. And I think that's often what's happening when somebody describes being an imposter syndrome. They're not able to have an internal sense of how good they are, because that would mean they would be consistently reminded and think through, you know, their skills, their qualities, their competencies, the great things that they did that day, why, the thing that they did well that day, what that meant about them. Those kind of things are not happening when we're dominated by that problem finding, problem identifying part. It's only about the negatives, it's only about the flaws and the deficits. As well as that problem finding part, I think the other part of us that's often very much encouraged at work, and again is not the place of an internalized sense of our success, is that place of the drives. Very much, you know, in these complicated driven careers, people will be focused on and be made to focus on the next thing. So if they get a promotion or they close a deal, is always thinking about, well, what's the next deal? What's the next promotion compared to others? Rarely does anybody get the opportunity and in the environment to really ground how good things are untouched. It's often about the next thing. It's often about the next deal. Where's the next amount of money coming from? What's the next promotion? As I say, well, you've done this, well done, thank you, but what's happening next? You know, when you complete a deal or complete a project, people will be saying, well, what's next on the agenda? That is that part of a business world, a corporate environment often, and we need, again, that part of drive. You know, drive is about winning, competing, acquiring resources, having more money, having more material status, and it's good to have a part of that in our lives because it does drive us forward. The trouble with it is it's never enough. We'll always need more if we're only ever in that part, and also it's always the part which is, as I say, looking forward to the next thing and looking at other people and comparing, rather than saying that untouched, this moment is great, rather than saying untouched, as you are, you're great at your job. It is not a place of saying these are the skills and qualities that you have to be appreciated and affirmed. So neither the survival part, which we're in a lot, I think, in business, in work, or the drive part, which we're in a lot in work, neither of those places are, as I say, that place of an internalized, strong, solid sense, consistent sense of our worth and value. And what I'm going to do in this video is talk, if we're talking about how to manage imposter syndrome, is to look at how to put much more energy into that part of us which is about connection with ourselves. And I'm going to give a few techniques that you can use that are going to hopefully grow that part and strengthen that part on an ongoing basis, that really does ground your worth and value in terms of your internal dialogue and how you see yourself. The person that you're around most of the time, of course, well, all of the time, is yourself. So there are certainly things that we can do as far as that internal dialogue, how we talk to ourselves, you know, mentalizing practices that are going to help manage this imposter syndrome by keeping us much more in that place of connection with ourselves. And it's not that we're asking anybody to be delusional about things. The thing about imposter syndrome is it's underestimating you. It's almost a sort of distorted way of thinking, because it only sees the problems and the negatives and is only looking at the ways in which things aren't good enough. It's absolutely underestimating you. So these exercises that I'll talk about are to hold a balanced and expansive view of you that takes in everything, including all of those things, as I say, that are great and good about you, all of those reasons that you're good at your job, and all of those reasons that you're successful. Just another reason why I think work really kind of promotes this imposter syndrome environment. I think it's, if you take it back to early experience for people, we get very used to external validation by getting our sense of achievement and our worth and value from others. So if you look at school, those sorts of things, we are mostly sitting there listening. We have, the human brain is unlike many other beings and animals in that it's very much built to be imprinted on. We're born with fear and impulses, but then the rest of it, our values, what's important to us, what success means, and our sense of self and who we are, comes in externally. So that is how our brains are conditioned. That's how we've set up our society. So it can make us very dependent on other people to affirm our success. And certainly if you grow up in a childhood environment with caregivers who do not mirror back your qualities and say why you're great, why you're good, what are the wonderful things about you, which it's not happening for a lot of us, again, we're not going to be able to internalize anything at that time. And then we go into work environments which again are we're meeting lots of other people's needs. It's very probably quite unusual for people within work environments to be validating your great qualities, your good qualities. Occasionally happens, I suppose, in appraisals and that kind of thing, but generally it's not the place where that will happen. So we're in environments where actually the affirmations that we get, the praise that we get, is often just about a particular aspect of us, so completing the deal or whatever that might be. So there's lots of reasons why you can see whether that's physiological for us from an evolutionary point of view, the way we're set up as human beings, what our childhoods are like, and then also what work and business environments are like. You can see there's lots of reasons why we don't get to internalize this sense of who we are. But what we're going to do now is just look at a few ways of making that different and how we can change it. Just before I start to go on to that, I just wanted to say something about the phrase imposter syndrome, or the term imposter syndrome. It's interesting that we don't just say that we're insecure at work, for example, or work worries or whatever it might be. It's interesting that we use the word, I think, imposter. And I did have a look at what the word imposter means. And it actually means to pretend to be somebody else in order to deceive others. And that always gets waved through the use of that term. But I was thinking about it in the context of a lot of kind of work environments and what people say about their work often, which is that they'll be doing it for kind of material reasons, perhaps status reasons, because they have to, ought to, should, and they may not actually be often enjoying what they're doing. So, if I think from my own personal point of view, I've done a video on the career change from law to mental health, which is on this channel, and I talk quite a lot about it there. But using the example of the last project that I did in this context, for example, on the M25, when my boss came to me and said, would you like to be involved in that project or lead that project? If I'm looking at my felt experience of things, as I explain in that video, I wasn't really that interested. I didn't really want to do it. But of course, I would have said, yes, that's absolutely something I would love to do. Thank you very much. When do I start? And I need to do that from the point of view of playing the game work. There were aspects of it that were interesting, but generally, a lot of it's about these are the things that you need to do to be part of things, to get promoted, to therefore get bonuses and all these things. But it's not in line, doing it is not in line with what I've felt. As I say, that's what I talk about quite a lot in that video. But bringing that back to this, what you could say about me in that situation is that I was pretending to be somebody else, so somebody that really loved that work and was interested in it, in order to deceive the person. I know deceive doesn't sound like a very a nice thing, but I don't mean it in any critical way of myself. But I was pretending to be. I was an imposter in some ways, as far as my felt experience of things. I was saying that I was going to enjoy doing something and wanted to, when actually quite a key part of me didn't want to do that. So I wonder whether we use that word imposter, whether for there's something around that for quite a lot of people, that they feel like imposters actually because their work does not engage every part of them. They don't get that much meaning and purpose from it. They don't love what they do. There are always going to be moments of not enjoying something, but more often than not, we would hope for somebody that it's absolutely possible to do something that they enjoy and get some fulfilment from. And if somebody's not doing that as a pattern, perhaps they do feel like an imposter for that reason. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that because it sort of goes to all of the other factors that might be at play with this issue of imposter syndrome and sort of anxiety generally in life. And I will conclude with that at the end of the video as well. But just moving on now to some ways, some ideas about how to manage that sense of imposter syndrome. And what I would suggest is putting more energy, if you're looking at the theory of it, more energy into that part that's about connection with self. So in that way we sort of crowd out the problems and the worries and the drive in some ways. How do we do that? There are 4 ways that I think we can potentially do that. The first one is to have an anchor memory, which is of a competent and confident moment. So that would be a time, a moment that you felt absolutely confident in what you do. Really draw that memory up, something that happened in the past. It doesn't matter in what context, it doesn't matter what job, but draw that memory up and really try to think about it in detail. So what can you see, hear, touch, taste, smell, and bring that memory into your mind. Try to make it as big as possible and to stay with it. And very importantly, notice what happens in your body. So connect the memory, the image that you're holding in mind, with your body, and notice what confidence feels like in your body, and try to make it bigger. Try to make it fill your body. If that's difficult to do that without another person around, then why don't you talk to somebody else about it? Why don't you explain what the memory is? As I say, what you could see, hear, touch, taste, smell. Explain it in detail, what you believed about yourself, what you believed about your world in that moment, and notice the effect again that that's having on your body. Really try to connect those two. And this can be an anchor memory that you can go back to at any point when those sorts of imposter syndrome thoughts of, oh, I'm going to get fired, or I'm not as good as other people. This is something you can come in with, something new you can come in with. When people say to get rid of imposter syndrome, because survival, because problem identifying, problem finding are a natural part of human experience and necessary, those thoughts are intrusive often. We're compelled to have them. They come in outside of consciousness. So we are always going to have thoughts of that nature. But what we want to do is make them moments. And what we want to do is when they come in, that you have something else to bring in after that, some other way to respond to them. And an anchor memory that I've described can be one of those ways. The second thing is perhaps something a bit more structured, which is a timeline of achievement. So if you go from get a piece of paper, a piece of A3 paper, and start at birth and move all the way along to now, along the bottom of it, with dates, and then mark along that all the achievements that have occurred over that time. Now that's going to include things that have happened at school. That's potentially include things that have happened at work. But think just not in terms of academic achievement, not in terms of the kind of traditional forms of success. I suppose they need to be there too, which is important, but all the other things that you've managed to maintain over that time too. So hobbies you've maintained, friendships, and really detail what that means as far as your qualities. So what qualities wise do you possess as a human being? What skills, qualities, competencies, talents do you possess that's meant that you've been able to do those things and achieve those things? So again, it's marking, doing it in a visual way. Lots of people prefer something visual and to see it, and it's sort of being reflected back to you. But mark on that, as I say, all those things you've achieved throughout, and be imaginative about it. As I say, it's not just restricted to getting your GCSEs and then getting this job, and those things are important because they mean important things about who you are. Getting your exam qualifications means something about focus and memory and intelligence and organisational skills. But also, as I say, add the hobbies, add the relationships you've maintained throughout that period, add the fact that you're physically healthy, if that's the case, and you take care of yourself and your body and what that means about you. So that's a more formal way to do it. But again, it's only an exercise we might need to do once. But once we've done it, it really reflects back to us. It can be something that really sticks in our mind in the future. The third thing that I would suggest is to keep some sort of record. I keep one on my phone of any time that I get positive feedback from people, any time where people write to me in a way that's somehow affirming skills, qualities, talents, competencies, those things, appreciation, gratitude. I mean, I don't include the names of anybody, but it is something that I keep because, as I say, what the imposter syndrome, what the problem identifying part does all the time is constantly remind you to forget those things. But those things are very much present. But for a lot of us, we're going to need to be going through something behaviourally and have a visual record of those things in order to really believe them. And if you're having a difficult time, if the imposter syndrome is around, then you can always have a look at that I keep it on your phone, which makes it very accessible, and read through, and I think that will shift your state. Again, what we're not suggesting in any way here that there's something delusional or encouraging that kind of thing about how you see yourself. It's just that there's an imbalance with imposter syndrome. It is a distorted way of seeing yourself. It underestimates you. So we need to consciously have some record or some way of restoring the balance and really showing that most of the time in life, most of the time, you are doing great things, neutral things, good things, and most of the qualities that you demonstrate in life are actually helpful for you. And this can be a way, as I say, of maintaining an ongoing record of that, which you can look at and really remind yourself whenever you need to. And the last thing is that whenever you complete something, whether that's a task, you send an email, whatever, or even a social interaction with somebody, give yourself a well done about it and a little narrative, a sort of description about why that went well, as far as the qualities that you demonstrated in order for that to happen. So if you're looking at sending an email, if you're pleased with it, spend a little bit of time afterwards saying, well done for doing that. The fact you were able to do it says good things about your communication skills, some emotional intelligence, building and maintaining relationships, whatever that might be. The same with interactions with other people, even friends you've known for a long time. We take a lot for granted. Our brains are really set up to take, if we're looking in terms of relationship with ourselves for granted, whether that's our physical bodies, whether that's our qualities as a human being. Because of this problem focus, because of the drives, we take a lot of ourselves for granted, and we really need, I think, after various interactions, after any interactions, any things that we do, to tell ourselves what it is that was good about us, that meant that we can do that. As I say, none of this is going to result in a situation where we get to some sort of distorted, delusional perception of ourselves, because mostly for people experiencing imposter syndrome, they're being compelled to think of the problems. That health and safety stuff is taken care of by your innate kind of animal type brain. So we need to be doing the other stuff, which is to, as I say, ground the good and the great about you. And just further on from that, if something good happens in life, if you're enjoying a moment, if you're feeling like something's gone well, then really try and lean into that moment physiologically. Notice what it feels like in your body. Make it bigger. They say that if you experience something like confidence for 20 seconds, then that installs a new neural pathway which you can rely on. And remember, your brain isn't naturally going to be doing that. Your brain's going to be focusing on the problems, really ingraining those problems, forming beliefs about yourself and others that are based on those problems, and imagining those problems. So what we want to do is make neural pathways which are about the great and the good in your life, whether that's relationships with other people, how you see yourself. And one of the ways to do that is when things do go well, really lean into those moments and then try and remember them later on as well. A lot of people have a gratitude practice, for example, so they'll end the day or begin the day thinking of 3 things that they were grateful for yesterday, or end the day thinking of 3 things they were grateful for that day. And when they can be anything. It can be that you remember remain physically healthy. It can be that you had a good interaction with somebody or got some positive feedback or had a good time at the gym, whatever it is. When they come forward, really try and stay with those memories and really try and lean into them and make them bigger. And when I say make them bigger, I mean stay with them longer and really try and notice what it feels like in your body to do that. I realise with this I'm sort of straying into all life things, but of course, as I'll come on to, thoughts, feelings, body behaviour, they are always out of work as well to sort of manage that imposter syndrome part, to make sure that we're spending much more time in that place of connection, affiliation, which is going to be the counter to imposter syndrome. Okay, so just a word on spending time thinking about how good we are at things. Some people do worry about that because there is this thing about humility and they worry about arrogance. Two things here. All of this that I've been talking about really is about relationship with self. It's not about telling other people how amazing we are. I mean, I would say on that perhaps human beings, we have a self-deprecatory tendency because we worry that other people might think we're arrogant maybe, but we could probably all do, certainly people who have imposter syndrome could probably do with a bit more of bringing and celebrating the good things about them and the things that they've achieved into relationship with other people, which is a sort of side issue. But for me, we're not talking about here about anything going out externally, though. We're looking at how we're talking to ourselves and that internal dialogue. These exercises are about how we treat ourselves and how we see ourselves. And if you're looking at arrogance as well, I think an important thing to remember, arrogance is, I think, about thinking I'm better than other people, is superiority over other people, probably more the place of drive actually. What this is about is that place of connection, like in an empty room, that I have these skills and qualities and competencies. So it's not saying I'm better than. That's often the territory of arrogance. As I say, this is much more about just having a grounded, balanced, expansive perception and self-image of who you are, so that as I say, that your successes can be internalized and remain internally. There's a constant dialogue and narrative around them internally. The other part of this, as far as thoughts as well, the exercises that I've just said are about putting more energy into the affiliation and connection part. Well, let's also just give a thought, I suppose, to the survival part that is kind of responsible for the narratives and the problems. I would just say in relation to that, of course, it's doing its best, as I say, so let's not treat it badly. We can't excise any part of ourselves. Generally it is the place of anxiety. People come and say they want to get rid of anxiety. The trouble is the anxious place, the survival part, is a part of who we are, so we cannot remove it, but what we're looking at is relating to it. So when that part steps forward with an imposter syndrome type thought, say I'm going to be fired, then because it's the catastrophe, that fear part often comes up with catastrophes. Let's say that we know that fear feelings are not facts, and we can say to that part, thank you for the information, I understand that you're trying to take care of me, but based on past experience, this is untrue, and what we're trying to do is to have a different experience now, and we're trying to let go of that perception. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but that sort of way of responding to that part, that imposter syndrome part, I think is going to be much more helpful than, for example, saying shut up or go away. We need to appreciate that it has some value somewhere, but tell it that we're relying on other parts now, that it often has a sort of distorted perception of things which can be unhelpful for us. So what we're going to do is rely more on this part of connection. If there is, of course, of something interesting that it's saying, some way in which our behaviour could change at work, some way in which a problem is manifesting at work, then we will absolutely do something about that and make changes. So we want to talk to it in a way that kind of respects it, but does not allow it free rein over our lives. So that's dealing very much with the thoughts, both putting more energy into the connection thoughts, talking to that part, the imposter syndrome part, the critic, sort of firmly, but in an understanding way, to let it know that it can hand over more to that place of connection. The thing generally with all this as well, although imposter syndrome is very much an experience that people have at work is that we need to really bear in mind that it is anxiety based, and that therefore we can soothe those anxious thoughts and grow connection in 100 other ways in our lives. So it's not just about, as I say, these techniques that I've been talking about from the point of view of reducing imposter syndrome, because reducing anxiety, we can look at our thoughts, our feelings, and particularly our body and our behaviours. A body that feels good, a body that feels safe, a body that's perhaps walking in nature is going to have less imposter syndrome thoughts. But creative behaviours, for example, whilst we're doing them and engaging in them, they are going to mean that we have less imposter syndrome thoughts. So there's lots of ways of managing these thoughts. I did a video which is on about comparisons and how to manage comparisons, and in that I talk about connection, putting more energy into that, putting more energy into creativity, and also cultivation, so 3 C's. And that, again, if you can have a look at that as well, I talk a lot more about all the different ways that we can, as I say, bring ourselves more into connection, more into creativity, cultivate, I mean literally doing the gardening, but creative pursuits, using our imagination to create, constructing a future in our imagination, all these different ways of, in some ways, crowding out the imposter syndrome part, that fear part. And my book talks a lot more about that in detail. It talks a lot more about all of this, actually. I mean, the main purpose of the book, my book's called Finding a Balanced Connection, is how to take energy really out of the threat part, whilst respecting it, out of the survival part, and put it in much more to that place of connection with self and with others, which is the place of good self-esteem, which is the place of internalising my success, which is the place of knowing who I am, having a grounded, expansive, balanced sense of who I am in the world. So I think the book will help with that, and I also think the online course, which I recorded as well, which is available on my website. The book, by the way, is available via my website, but also on Amazon. And my course is available on the website too. Of course, if you're really, really struggling with this, then do come and talk to a therapist. Generally, I would love to hear your comments on it below the video. If there's anything that you found helpful or interesting, anything else you'd like to say that you think would be helpful to people watching the video. If you like the video, as ever, please do give it a like, and also do subscribe to the channel if you can. I'd love to hear from you, whether that's, as I say, under the video with comments, or sending an email through directly to my email address. Please feel free to do that as well. The next video I do, kind of corporate related, again, it's going to be around burnout, I think. But thank you for watching, and I hope it's been helpful, and I'll see you again soon.